So today we're gonna continue our
Or
video
Friday.
stream. Yeah, Friday video stream. And today we're gonna talk about some more subjects that people ask us a lot. We'll start off with VLANs as they apply to Wi-Fi. Um, so VLANs are a way to separate broadcast domains on networks, and you can apply these VLANs to different SSIDs on your access points. So when you do that, there's other steps that you need to do, right, Brian?
Yeah, yeah. There's a couple. Yeah, there's a lot of. I guess not a lot of steps, but there's. You have to make sure that you have a router that is capable of uh, building VLANs or implementing
Routing
VLANs.
VLANs, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
and
so
then oh, go ahead.
so yeah, you need a router that is capable of routing multiple VLANs. You need to, in most cases, you need to set up a separate DHCP server for each VLAN. So each one of these VLANs will be on a different physical network that they're not attached to the same subnet or anything like that, right?
Yeah,
And then the VLAN also separates it filters out any broadcast traffic between WLANs also. Um, so it seems simple. You really just need to put the tag on the SSID on the wireless LAN, and then you would also need to tag every single port that an access point's plugged into that's using that VLAN, as well as the uplink ports on every switch, all the way back to the router.
right. But so why do we? So why do we? I think the question is why do we run into VLANs for us, right? Customers typically ask us questions on guest guest networks, really, right?
Yeah.
Is how we typically run into it.
Yeah, so they ask, how can we separate guest traffic? I mean, you know, but in like corporate networks, they're gonna have separate VLANs for like maybe the departments, accounting, the sales. They may have one for guests. One for general internet access, maybe. So in that, yeah, in that
And the reason you do that, though, right? The reason you do that is because you have specific groups that have specific resources,
mhm,
right? And you can also do other things rather than just resources. So if I want to share a printer with a team of people, maybe in the accounting team, for example, or in the marketing team, they can have access to that printer, and they can only have access to that printer. So you put that on the VLAN, and that's one of the resources. Other resources would be like routers, or not routers, servers, for example. But you can do other things. You can actually limit like bandwidth on a particular VLAN if you need to do that as well.
yep,
So, and you can do that for every group or every VLAN, and you can tie groups to those particular VLANs.
right, right. So there's a lot you can do with it. It's a little bit tricky to set up. So if I was somebody that said I don't have a lot of network experience, I'm not sure about switching and routing and all this, I would not recommend using VLANs or unless you're willing to study up and figure out exactly what you need to do.
Yeah, or create a test site at your home or at your business
Right.
to get really familiar with it. I would suggest getting familiar with a particular router that
Right.
that you like to use. So that's a big thing because it all starts there, and
Exactly.
then and obviously have switches that you're familiar with along with access points as well. In our case, we typically run into people that are trying to separate SSIDs. So I'd be comfortable with these different network appliances, and then I would set that up in like your personal network, your test lab, basically.
Yeah, because you're absolutely right there. Because when you're using VLANs, the the function of the wireless LAN system and the access points is very small. Like all you really have to do is just set the VLAN tag on the SSID. Everything else is dependent on you knowing how to use that router and the switches in between. There's
Right.
if someone sets up a VLAN and says, "Oh, it's not working," it's most likely not the access point that's misconfigured. It's something on the back end. You need to have a switch that can route VLANs, like we're using the Microtech. It's pretty easy to do with that, but
Yeah, the
not every
particular.
router can do it.
Yeah, that particular router. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of the big. That's a thing that comes up a lot. So we'll get calls and they're trying to put an SSID on a VLAN. With access points, it's literally a drop down, and you select the VLAN and you're done. You tie it to a SSID and you're finished. It's like you're saying, like it's everything else. It's okay. Is the port tagged or untagged? Is the port that's going to the router, for example, is that tagged and untagged? And then is the router set up to does it have the VLAN set up properly? Does it have DHCP server running on that particular VLAN? So there's a lot that's tied into that. So
And yeah, you brought up the terminology too, like that. So it should be, if you're setting up a secondary VLAN, it's probably going to mean that you have to use untagged on the switches. So
yeah,
untagged is basically, I'm sorry, yeah, untagged, right?
tagged on the port and then untagged on the
Right. So
uplink port.
you're right. So it's tagged on the port and then untagged for the default VLAN, which is usually 1 or something like that. So that means port 1 is running on every single port that it's untagged on, and you don't need to specify it in the device like the access point.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it can get tricky and
It can,
really
yeah,
have
it
to
can
look
get
at the configuration.
Yeah, kind of in our world, you're forced to. I was forced to actually, set it up at my house to make sure I understood all the steps that were required because we get this question a lot, and so, with Ingenious, it's pretty straightforward because you're working with access points and switches, and then you're working with a third-party router, and it all comes down to that third-party router, and it could be any vendor. It could be any vendor, but it's pretty much the same. It's just different menus, obviously, and things like that. But so yeah, I was forced to kind of okay, I need to set this up for myself, and I'm not even in technical support, but just to better understand
Just
it.
so you can talk about it, when people
Yeah.
have questions. We know that when there's a problem, it's usually something with the router or switch configuration.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so we talked about guest networks a little bit. So an easier way, instead of using VLANs, somebody could use a guest network, right? If they
Yeah.
want to have a network that's separate from their business network,
Yeah.
they can use a guest network. And there's different ways you can implement that guest network. You could just turn on layer 2 isolation on that
Yeah.
SSID that you want to use. And what that would do is separate the wireless traffic on the different users on that network. The layer 2 would separate them so they cannot see each other's shares or whatever's going
Yeah.
on their PC.
Yeah, we get this question a lot. So with Ingenious, I'll just use us as an example. I think applies to everybody, and Jeff, you know more vendors than me in regards to like the configurations and things. But yes, you simply just create a new SSID. You call it guest, and then the configurations of the SSID you would implement. Obviously, a security type. Layer 2 isolation, or some people call it client isolation, layer 2 isolation. That would disable the ability of other client devices seeing one another on that particular network. In our case, you can actually set up what we call as bridging, or you can set up NAT, and NAT would you would actually hand out IP addresses if you use NAT. So there's a couple different ways to do it. But the preferred method, I would say, is a VLAN.
Yes. So that's
Not necessarily the easiest way,
right.
but the preferred way.
The most secure way. If someone they want to secure that, so it's the most secure. The VLAN's the way to do it, but it's also the most configuration to get that thing working, right? So it's going to require the most configuration.
Yep.
The
most knowledge.
Yeah, the most knowledge to do that. The easiest would be just take that L2 isolation or client isolation feature, and that'll separate the wireless clients from each other, but once they get back onto the wired network, they could see that you have a share or printer there, so they'd all be able to hit that. So it's going to protect them from each other, but not from whatever you have in your wired network. So another way to do it, like you mentioned, was use the NAT. So when you enable NATing on that guest network, it's going to put it on a separate subnet. So then the whole guest network is on that NATed subnet. It's physically separated from your main network, where you may have your printers and file shares and things like that. So and then again on that NAT, you can enable the layer 2, so they can't see each other on that too.
Yeah, so that's the quickest and easiest way.
Yeah.
Is just creating the guest SSID and turning on L2 isolation.
And I would do NAT too, because that actually separates them from your main network, where you maybe have something that you want to keep protected, right? So
if you're trying to set that up, then we suggest then SSID, guest SSID with NAT and L2 isolation, and you're done.
Yep, that's the basic way to do it. Everyone hears VLANs, but to actually get that implemented, it's gonna take some knowledge to do. So guest network with NAT and L2 is probably the way to go for a lot of people. Okay, so I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about captive portals too in walled gardens, because I've gotten some questions about this week too, and there's like so much you can do with these things. I know a lot of people hate them, like a lot of the Wi-Fi gurus say they're bad because they it's like a roadblock to the internet, but then again, everyone asks for them. Everyone wants to do different things.
Everybody wants them.
Everyone wants them, but I know they're bad, but everyone wants them. A lot of hotels require them. At the minimum, they want a page that pops up that says, okay, you agree not to do anything bad, and then click here, and then you get the Wi-Fi. So that requires a splash page and a captive portal. So I know, like on the Genius system, you can do a bunch of things. I actually went through this morning. I tried all the different methods just to see what you could do, and it's pretty impressive. So you can do that click through where you just click I agree, and it lets you on the Wi-Fi. Or there's different types of authentication that you can enable. Now we're gonna talk about the Genius Cloud authentication, which is basically a built-in Radius server in the Genius Cloud, and you can add users in there, and then they can log in through a splash page with username and password, right? So you can do that. You can do a Radius authentication, which we're going to talk about in a minute too, about how to set up a Radius authentication.
That's a lot. That's a lot of stuff to talk about.
It's a lot of stuff. It won't take long. And then you can do a social login, which means you're gonna basically click on allow your Facebook account to authorize the login, so that on the back end we'll get some information about who the user is. Like we'll get their Facebook account information, maybe. It'll get them to like. Is it like on the Ingenious system? Does it make them like the Ingenious page or the page?
No.
It doesn't do anything. How do you actually capture that user info then? I tried it, but I didn't see where it was logged or anything.
I have never used it.
Oh, you've never used it. Okay. So yeah, I'm gonna investigate.
Normally what is being used in authentication type. Okay, so let's talk about this really quick. So we just talked about guest SSIDs, right, and how to set up guest SSID. So if you want to enable captive portal, where you direct somebody to maybe a splash page, or you're really implementing like an authentication type when you turn on captive portal, there's multiple ways of doing captive portal. There's multiple authentication types within captive portal.
Right.
The number one used is click-through.
Click-through, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what most.
You want to make it as easy as possible for your guest. You do not want to complicate it. But yeah, there are other methods. We have some customers that use social login, but I rarely, that was being talked about a while ago. And maybe people still use it, but a lot of our customers
have it. I know like Ruckus has the same thing, so they all have it. I don't know, maybe it's like it's considered some sort of privacy concern for some people that are implementing it. I don't know, but But it's like
Yeah,
a way you're
use-
getting information from the user to use your network. They're paying you by giving you their Facebook account info, right?
yeah, and we work with companies called. I'll give an example. There's Purple Wi-Fi, and then there's Cloud for Wi,
Right.
which takes it another level where you can actually do push notifications to the client devices. There's a ton of things you can implement sensors within like a retail establishment,
Yeah.
and you can actually do mobile like location stuff like that. So it can get
Tracking.
really advanced,
Yeah. You do
and
all
that's an added cost if you
Right.
want to do something like that.
Got it.
But
Yeah, of course.
the majority of the time it's click through. But yeah, and then we do run into custom radius, and we do have customers using voucher service and ingenious authentication as well.
Yeah, the voucher service is interesting because you can basically create an account. An administrator can create an account, give a little piece of paper, maybe with the username, password, to somebody coming into a hotel, say, and then they can log in with that information.
Yeah, voucher is interesting. We do have some customers using this, but yeah, you basically you can create the username passcode, and it's based off of how many clients they can actually associate with using those credentials, and for a period of time. So it just really depends on kind of what you're trying to do. Um, so we do have customers that do use the voucher service. In particular, like in smaller hotels, I would say, or in marinas and different parks. That's where we typically see kind of voucher service being used.
Yeah, so that's interesting. And then just to touch on walled garden, just to explain what it is, it's basically an area where before they're authenticated to your network, they have access to this one subnet. Maybe you can put some sign-up pages. Maybe you want them to access a portion of the internet. You want them to be able to go to, let's say, Wikipedia or something. You can put that in there as a walled garden, right? And
Yeah.
it's basically what they can access before they authenticate to your network.
Yeah, and you can apply filters and things like that, right?
Yeah.
So you can say, okay, you can't go here, but you
Right.
can go to these other areas,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So that's what that is. If everyone's wondering what walled garden is, I mean, it's kind of confusing. So, all right. So we wanted to talk about radius auth too. I think we have time for today? It won't take long since we have this fresh in our minds. We were dealing with this week.
Yeah.
So let's just talk about this. So one of the ways to authenticate to the wireless network is radius. So it can be kind of tricky to set up. You have to have a radius server on the back end, and basically to set up on the Wi-Fi side on the wireless LAN SSID. It's very easy. You just put in a couple little things there. You put in the IP address of the radius server, the port, and the secret. That's really all you have to put in on the wireless LAN to do the radius authentication. Now, on the back end, you need to have a working radius server that you know is working. You need to know all the ports are open. It's on the same subnet as the access points, right? Because they have to.
And it's routed properly.
It's routed properly on a different network.
Yeah, if you have VLANs implemented, that's where it gets a little complicated.
Exactly.
You have to make.
So then you could have VLANs also, and you got to make sure that those access points need to be able to contact that radius server. You know, all the ports, the VLANs have to be open, all that stuff. So I would, again, like you said, I would set it up at home on a flat network with the radius server here and the access point here. Make sure that's working, and then move it to your complicated setup after that. Because there's a lot of things that can go wrong, even if they're right next to each other.
Yeah, you have to make sure it's working, and then once access point, client through access point to radius server is working through a switch maybe or something or whatever, then you can implement it into kind of a business setting, and then you're just adding more components, and now maybe you're adding in VLANs, and so the two will work with one another. The two endpoints will work with one another. You just have to make sure the flow of traffic is routed or works from one point to another. So there's a couple things that you could possibly do that we experience. Like you'll see on the radius server entry points of, okay, we do see this client device trying to authenticate, right? So there's some things that we can see there.
Right, so you'll see the log. You want to look at the log on Genius side, if it's a Genius, look on the cloud log, and you can see the user trying to authenticate, and then you can look on the back end of the Radius server in that log, make sure you're seeing that the access point's hitting it and trying to authenticate this user. And that's really what you gotta do. You look at both those logs, see what's going on. If you don't see anything on the Radius server, traffic's probably not getting over there for some reason, or the secret may be wrong. But you'll probably see that. You'll probably see in the debug log if like the secret's wrong. You know.
Yeah.
There's really not, or you know, you have the wrong port. Obviously, it's not going to get there.
The security type is really important
Security
to have.
type heap or EAP, yeah, it has to EAP. You have to make sure that's working. And I know on the Radius server side, you have to have a certificate loaded for some of these types, and have that all working. Now, what I found, I have a Synology network storage device, and that has, you know, it's a Synology disk station. It has a Radius app that you can easily just click and install on it. It's probably an implementation of OpenRadius, and it uses the certificate server that's on the Synology. So that's one way of implementing a Radius server that's really easy. It's, you just buy that box, put a drive in it, and you can run a Radius server without having to roll your own or use Microsoft's or whatever, anything like that. So that's really great for testing. You can add, then you add local accounts in the Synology, and people can authenticate to the wireless LAN just like that.
Yep.
Now, and if you don't want to use your own Radius server, let's say you want to use WPA Enterprise, or WPA 2 Enterprise or WPA 3 Enterprise, and you don't have your Radius server, a lot of these systems have a built-in Radius server, like we touched on before, and Genius has the Cloud Radius, which is basically just a Radius server built into the cloud. You can add user accounts into the cloud, and then authenticate against that.
Yeah. You can build. You can build the users like you're saying, and you can tie them to particular SSIDs.
Yeah.
And then you can build that list within. For us, for cloud, you can build it within the cloud interface. So you can build all these users in there and tie them to specific SSIDs. So if you have multiple SSIDs that has WPA3 Enterprise and you're using the cloud Radius server, then you would just tie it to that particular SSID. And you can do that across multiple SSIDs, and they can all be different. We wanted to make sure we supplied our customers with some sort of Radius solution, so they don't have to use a third party or something like that. So that's available.
That's a real easy way to use account authentication without having your own Radius server. And you could also use things like Microsoft Directory Server. There's add-ins for Radius for that also. Any of those that may not be totally standards-based, you could run into issues with, I guess, but anything that says it's Radius should be able to talk to, an access point that speaks Radius.
Yep.
All right, well, I think we hit on a lot of topics today in a short amount of time. And so if anyone has any questions about those, please post, in the comments below, and, we'll answer those. And then next week, like around 9:30ish, we'll try to do another one of these, and we'll answer those questions, and hopefully have some more topics that have come up in the week. Okay, so please remember to like and subscribe for more help with Wi-Fi. Okay, I ended the stream.